The first flakes of December snow had turned vicious by the time Ryder Galloway rode his chestnut mare down the rutted main street of Deeming, New Mexico Territory, in 1881. And through the white curtain of the blizzard, he spotted two figures huddled against the wall of the shuttered mercantile. One of them so small she could have been mistaken for a bundle of rags if not for the thin arm wrapped protectively around an even smaller form. Ryder pulled his horse to a stop, the leather of his saddle creaking in the cold, and dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had spent more years on horseback than on his own 2 feet. The taller figure looked up at him with eyes that held equal parts wariness and desperation, and he saw she was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, with dark hair plastered to her pale face by melting snow. The smaller one, a child of maybe 7 or 8, trembled violently against her side. "Please, mister," the young woman said, her voice barely carrying over the howling wind. "My sister and we have not eaten in 3 days. Our wagon broke down 2 days' ride from here, and our parents—" Her voice caught, and Ryder saw the grief flash raw across her features. "They did not make it through the cold. If you could spare anything, even just a crust of bread." Ryder looked at them both, at the blue tinge to their lips, at the way their threadbare dresses hung on frames grown thin from hunger, and something in his chest tightened. He had been riding hard for 2 weeks, driving a small herd of cattle to buyers in Silver City, and his pockets were heavy with more money than he had seen in a year. But more than that, he saw in the young woman's eyes a fierce protectiveness that reminded him of his own mother, long dead now, who had fought just as hard to keep him and his siblings alive through harsh Kansas winters. "Stand up," he said, his voice rough from disuse and the cold. When the young woman struggled to her feet, pulling her sister up with her, he saw how badly they shook, how close they were to the edge of what a body could endure. "What are your names?" "Katherine Harper," she said, meeting his eyes with a dignity that poverty and desperation had not stripped away. "This is my sister Margaret." "Well, Miss Harper," Ryder said, shrugging out of his heavy sheepskin coat and draping it around Katherine's shoulders before she could protest. "You will never be cold or hungry again. I give you my word on that." Katherine stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign tongue. "Sir, I do not understand." "You will," he said, scooping Margaret up into his arms. The child weighed nothing, just bones and shallow breaths, and fury at the unfairness of it all burned hot in his gut. "Come on. The boarding house is just down the street. We will get you both warm and fed, and then we can talk about the rest." He half expected Katherine to refuse, to cling to that pride he could see in the set of her shoulders, but she must have known they were past the point where pride mattered more than survival. She nodded, clutching his coat around herself, and followed him through the snow. The boarding house keeper, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who had outlasted 3 husbands and earned herself a reputation for both excellent cooking and taking no nonsense from anyone, took one look at the frozen children and ushered them inside with a stream of words that mixed English and Cantonese in equal measure. Within minutes, both girls were wrapped in quilts before the fire in the common room, and Mrs. Chen was pressing bowls of hot broth into their hands. "Slowly," Ryder cautioned as Katherine raised the bowl to her lips with shaking hands. "Too much too fast and you will just lose it again." She nodded, clearly knowing this truth already, and took careful sips while encouraging Margaret to do the same. Ryder watched them both, these strangers who had somehow become his responsibility in the space of 5 minutes, and wondered what exactly he had committed himself to. The practical thing would have been to buy them a meal, perhaps pay for a few nights at the boarding house, and then continue on his way. He had a ranch to run, cattle to tend, and winter was the worst possible time to take on extra mouths to feed. But he had made a promise, and Ryder Galloway was not a man who went back on his word. After the girls had finished their broth, and Mrs. Chen had bustled them off to a room upstairs with promises of a hot bath and warm beds, Ryder sat by the fire and tried to think through what came next. He owned a decent spread about 10 miles outside of town, 1,500 acres of grassland and scrub that supported a herd of 200 head of cattle and a handful of horses. He had a small house, nothing fancy but solid, and a bunkhouse that currently sat empty since he worked the land alone. He could afford to take them in, certainly. The money from the cattle sale would carry them through the winter with plenty to spare. The question was whether Katherine Harper would accept his help beyond tonight. He got his answer the next morning when he found her in the boarding house dining room, dressed in a calico dress that Mrs. Chen must have provided, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked better with food and rest, though her face still carried the gauntness of near starvation, and her eyes were troubled. "Mr. Galloway," she said as he approached the table where she sat, "I want to thank you for your kindness last night. Margaret is still sleeping, but she has some color back in her cheeks. We are grateful." "But," Ryder prompted, hearing the unspoken word. "But I cannot accept charity beyond this," Katherine said, lifting her chin. "I am capable of working. I can cook, clean, so." "Surely there is someone in town who needs help. Margaret and I can earn our keep." Ryder pulled out a chair and sat down, stretching his long legs out before him. He was a tall man, just over 6 feet, with sandy brown hair that tended to fall into his blue eyes, and a face that the sun and wind had weathered into leather. At 27, he felt older most days, the weight of responsibility and loneliness pressing down on him. But looking at Katherine now, at the determination in her green eyes and the stubborn set of her jaw, he felt something shift inside him. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "Hear me out before you say no." She folded her hands on the table before her and waited. "I have a ranch outside of town," Ryder began. "Good land, enough cattle to make a decent living, but it is just me out there, and that means a lot of things do not get done the way they should. The house is clean enough but not comfortable. I eat beans and hardtack more often than proper meals. And come spring, when the calving starts, I will be running myself ragged trying to keep up with it all." "You are offering me a job," Katherine said slowly. "I am offering you and your sister a home," Ryder corrected. "You would keep the house, do the cooking, help with the chickens and the garden in spring. Margaret is too young to work much, but she could go to school in town. I would pay you a fair wage on top of providing room and board, and you would have your own space, your own privacy." Katherine studied him with those sharp green eyes, and Ryder forced himself to meet her gaze steadily. He knew how it looked, a single man offering to take in a young woman and her sister. Tongues would wag, and people would assume things. But he also knew his own character, and he would not apologize for trying to do right by someone in need. "Why?" Katherine asked finally. "You do not know us. We could be thieves or worse. Why would you trust us in your home?" "Because I looked into your eyes yesterday and saw someone who would die before she let harm come to her sister," Ryder said simply. "That is the kind of person I want on my land, someone with loyalty and grit. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I am fairly handy with a gun and I sleep light. If you were planning to rob me, I would not make it easy." The corner of Katherine's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I suppose that is meant to be reassuring." "It is meant to be honest," Ryder said. "Look, Miss Harper, I understand if you want to refuse. But winter in the territory is not kind, especially to folks without resources. This is a chance for you and Margaret to have a warm place to stay, good food, and some security while you figure out what comes next." If come spring you decide you want to move on, I will help you get wherever you want to go. But for now, let me keep the promise I made yesterday." Katherine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. Then she said, "Our parents were heading to California. They had heard there was work in the orchards, a chance for a better life. We sold everything we had back in Missouri to buy that wagon and supplies for the journey." Her voice was steady, but Ryder could hear the pain beneath it. 3 days out of Deeming, the wagon hit a rut and broke an axle. Father thought he could fix it, but the weather turned. He went looking for help and never came back. Mother went after him the next morning and Katherine swallowed hard. The cold took her before nightfall. "Margaret and I tried to walk here, but by the time we arrived, I had sold everything we had left just for bits of food along the way." "I am sorry," Ryder said, and meant it. The West was littered with the graves of people who had gambled everything on a dream and lost. "I tell you this so you understand," Katherine said, meeting his eyes again. "I have nothing to offer you but hard work and honesty. I cannot pay you back if this goes badly. I cannot even promise that Margaret and I will not be more trouble than we are worth. But if you are truly offering us a chance, then yes, Mr. Galloway, we will accept." They shook hands on it there in the dining room of Mrs. Chen's boarding house, and Ryder felt the calluses on Katherine's palm, the strength in her grip. This was no delicate flower who would wilt at the first sign of hardship. This was a survivor, and he respected that. They left Deeming 2 days later, after Ryder had purchased supplies and warm clothing for both Katherine and Margaret. The little girl was still too quiet, too haunted by what she had witnessed, but she clung to Katherine's hand and watched Ryder with big, solemn eyes. He bought her a peppermint stick at the mercantile, and the small smile she gave him felt like a victory. The ride out to the ranch was cold but clear, the snow from the blizzard already melting under a pale winter sun. Katherine rode behind Ryder on his mare. Margaret settled in front of him, and he was acutely aware of Katherine's arms around his waist, the trust it took for her to hold onto him like this. They were strangers still, bound together by circumstance and a promise made in desperation, but Ryder found himself hoping this arrangement would work. The ranch had been lonely since his father died 2 years ago, since his sister married and moved to Texas. It would be good to have voices in the house again, even if those voices belonged to people who might leave come spring. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low rise, a simple structure of adobe and timber with a wide porch and a tin roof. It was not much to look at, but it was solid and well built, and Ryder had spent the better part of a year making improvements after his father's death. Behind it stood the barn and the bunkhouse, and beyond that, the land rolled away in gentle swells of brown grass and scattered juniper trees. "It is beautiful," Katherine said softly, and Ryder felt a flush of pride. "It is home," he said. "Has been for my family since '67 when my father filed the claim. He always said this land would make us prosperous if we just worked hard enough." He did not add that his father had worked himself into an early grave trying to prove that statement true. He helped them down from the horse and showed them inside. The main room was spacious, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall and simple furniture that his mother had brought from Kansas. 2 small bedrooms opened off the main room, and a lean-to kitchen had been added to the back. It was clean, as he had told Katherine, but stark. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no softness anywhere to make it feel like more than just a place to sleep between long days of work. "You and Margaret can take my bedroom," Ryder said, gesturing to the larger of the 2 rooms. "I will move my things to the spare room." "We cannot take your room," Katherine protested. "You can and you will," Ryder said firmly. "It has the better mattress and more space. You will be more comfortable there." Katherine looked like she wanted to argue further, but Margaret tugged on her hand and whispered something. Katherine's expression softened and she nodded. "Very well. Thank you, Mr. Galloway." "Ryder," he said. "If we are going to be living under the same roof, you might as well call me Ryder." "Then you should call me Katherine," she replied, "or Kate, which is what most people use." "Kate," he repeated, and liked the way it sounded. They fell into a routine over the following weeks, tentative at first but growing easier with familiarity. Kate proved to be as good as her word, keeping the house spotless and cooking meals that made Ryder remember what it felt like to look forward to supper. She made curtains from fabric he bought in town, sewed quilts from scraps, and slowly transformed the Stark house into something that felt lived in. Margaret began to emerge from her shell, laughing occasionally, playing with the barn cat Ryder had not known he had until Kate pointed it out. Ryder found himself lingering in the house more than he had before, inventing excuses to come inside during the day. He told himself it was just to check on them, to make sure they had everything they needed, but the truth was he enjoyed their company. Kate had a sharp wit and a wealth of stories from her life in Missouri, and she listened with genuine interest when he talked about the ranch and his plans for it. Margaret took to following him around when she was not with her sister, peppering him with questions about the horses and cattle. It was Margaret, in fact, who first made him realize how much danger his heart was in. They were in the barn one afternoon in early January, and he was showing her how to curry one of the horses when she looked up at him with those serious eyes and said, "I like it here, Ryder. I hope we do not have to leave." "You do not have to leave," he assured her. "You can stay as long as you want." "Kate says we should not impose," Margaret said, her small hands moving the brush in careful strokes. "She says when spring comes, we should think about moving to a town where she can find proper work." Something cold settled in Ryder's chest at those words. The thought of Kate and Margaret leaving, of the house going back to being empty and silent, was suddenly unbearable. When had that happened? When had they gone from being strangers he was helping to people he could not imagine being without? That night, after Margaret had gone to bed, Ryder found Kate on the porch, wrapped in a shawl and watching the stars. He joined her, leaning against the railing. "Cold night," he said. "But clear," she replied. "I have always loved winter skies. They seem brighter somehow, cleaner." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Ryder said, "Margaret mentioned you were thinking about leaving in the spring." Kate glanced at him, her expression unreadable in the darkness. "I thought it would be appropriate. You have been more than generous, Ryder, but this was meant to be a temporary arrangement. I assumed you would want your home back to yourself eventually." "What if I did not?" The words were out before Ryder could think them through, raw and honest. "What if I wanted you to stay?" Kate turned to face him fully, and even in the dim light from the windows, he could see the surprise in her eyes. "Ryder, I do not understand." He took a breath, knowing he was about to lay his cards on the table and risk everything. "These past weeks, having you and Margaret here, it has made me realize how lonely I have been. This place feels like a home again instead of just somewhere I sleep between working myself half to death. I like hearing you sing while you cook. I like Margaret's questions and her laughter. I like—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I like you, Kate, more than I should probably considering the circumstances, but there it is." Kate was quiet for so long that Ryder thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then she said softly, "I like you too. You are a good man, Ryder Galloway." The kind of man I did not think existed outside of stories. But liking someone and building a life with them are different things. You offered us shelter when we were desperate, and I will always be grateful for that. But I will not have you bound to us out of obligation or pity." "It is not pity," Ryder said, turning to face her and taking her hands in his. They were warm despite the cold, and he held them carefully. "Kate, I am not good with fancy words, but I will try to make you understand. When I saw you and Margaret that day in the snow, yes, I wanted to help. But as I have gotten to know you, as I have watched you bring life back into this house and light back into your sister's eyes, I have come to care for you, deeply. I wake up every morning glad that you are here, and I go to bed every night grateful that I will get to see you again the next day. If that is not the beginning of something real, then I do not know what is." Kate's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Ryder, I am afraid of hoping for too much, of trusting something that feels too good to be true. I have lost so much already. If I let myself care for you and something happens, I do not know if I could bear it." "Life does not come with guarantees," Ryder said gently. "I learned that when I lost my parents, when I watched my father work himself to death trying to prove he could make this land pay. But I also learned that the things worth having are worth the risk. You are worth the risk, Kate." She looked up at him, searching his face for something, and whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. Ryder wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and felt something click into place inside him. This was right. This was what he had been missing without knowing it. "I am afraid too," he whispered into her hair. "But I am more afraid of letting you walk away without knowing if we could have had something good." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other against the cold, and when they finally went inside, something had shifted between them. They were not just housemates anymore, not just an employer and employee. They were two people tentatively reaching for something more. Over the following months, as winter slowly loosened its grip and gave way to the tentative warmth of early spring, Ryder and Kate grew closer. It was not a rushed courtship, not a wild passion that burned hot and fast. Instead, it was built on shared mornings over coffee, on long conversations after Margaret had gone to bed, on the thousand small intimacies of living together. Ryder taught Kate to ride properly, and she laughed when her horse spooked at a jackrabbit and nearly unseated her. Kate taught Ryder to dance, pushing the furniture in the main room aside and humming a waltz while they spun awkwardly across the floor. Margaret watched them both with knowing eyes and a small smile that suggested she understood more than they gave her credit for. In March, Ryder had to make a trip to Las Cruces to buy seed for spring planting, and he invited Kate and Margaret to come along. It was Margaret's first real adventure since they had come to the ranch, and her excitement was infectious. They spent 2 days in the town, staying at a hotel that Kate insisted was too expensive, but Ryder waved off as a necessary indulgence. He bought Margaret a new dress, and Kate a length of blue fabric that matched her eyes, and he felt like a wealthy man, even though his bank account said otherwise. On the evening before they were set to return home, Ryder took Kate to dinner at the best restaurant in town, leaving Margaret in the care of the hotel keeper's wife. Kate wore a dress borrowed from the woman who ran the boarding house where they had first stayed, and with her hair done up and the candlelight softening her features, she took Ryder's breath away. "You are staring," she said, a blush coloring her cheeks. "I am appreciating," Ryder corrected with a grin. "There is a difference." They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, and when the meal was finished and they stepped out into the cool evening air, Ryder took her hand. They walked through the quiet streets, passing adobe buildings and the occasional lit window, until they reached a small plaza with a fountain in the center. "Kate," Ryder said, stopping and turning to face her. His heart was pounding and his mouth felt dry despite the wine they had shared with dinner. "I need to ask you something." She looked up at him, her expression open and trusting. "What is it?" "I know we have not been together long," he began. And I know the circumstances that brought us together were not exactly conventional. But these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You make me want to be better, to build something that lasts, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold band with a single small diamond, nothing fancy but the best he could afford. He opened it and showed it to her, and saw her eyes go wide. "Katherine Harper," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves jangling through him. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Kate stared at the ring, then at him, and for a terrible moment Ryder thought she was going to refuse. Then she laughed, a sound that was half joy and half disbelief, and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said fiercely. "Yes, Ryder Galloway, I will marry you." He kissed her then, there in the plaza under the stars, and it felt like coming home. Her lips were soft and warm, and she kissed him back with an intensity that made his head spin. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, she was smiling so wide it looked like it hurt. "I love you," she said. "I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to say it." "I love you too," Ryder replied, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone." They were married 3 weeks later in Deeming, in a simple ceremony at the church with Mrs. Chen and the minister's wife as witnesses. Margaret stood beside Kate, beaming with pride in her new dress, and Ryder thought he had never seen anything more beautiful than his bride in her simple white gown, her dark hair crowned with wildflowers. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Ryder carried Kate over the threshold while Margaret giggled and ran ahead to light the lamps. That night, after Margaret had gone to sleep in what was now firmly her own room, Ryder and Kate lay together in the big bed that was now theirs, and he held her close. "Are you happy?" he asked, running his fingers through her unbound hair. "Happier than I have been in a very long time," Kate replied, tracing patterns on his chest. "When you found us that day in the snow, I thought we were going to die. I had accepted it, had made my peace with it. And then you appeared like something out of a dream and promised us we would never be cold or hungry again. You kept that promise, Ryder, and you gave us so much more than warmth and food. You gave us a home, a family, a future." "You gave me those things too," Ryder said. "I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You reminded me what it feels like to truly live." They made love then, tender and unhurried, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Afterward, Kate fell asleep in his arms, and Ryder lay awake for a while, marveling at how much his life had changed in just a few short months. He had gone from being alone to having a wife and a sister-in-law, from a house that echoed with emptiness to one filled with laughter and warmth. He had thought he was rescuing Kate and Margaret that day in the snow, but the truth was they had rescued him just as much. Spring arrived in full force, bringing with it the endless work of calving season and planting the garden. Kate proved to be as capable outdoors as she was indoors, helping with the calves and getting her hands dirty in the soil. Margaret started school in town, riding in with Ryder 3 days a week and staying with Mrs. Chen, who had taken a fierce liking to the girl. The herd thrived, the garden flourished, and the ranch began to feel like the prosperous spread Ryder's father had always dreamed it could be. In June, Kate told him she was pregnant. They were working in the garden together, her hands deep in the earth as she planted beans, when she said casually, "I think we should add another bedroom to the house." Ryder looked up from the row of corn he was hoeing. "Why is that?" "Because we are going to need it in about 7 months, Kate said, and the smile on her face told him everything. He dropped the hoe and crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her up and into his arms. "Truly," she confirmed, laughing as he spun her around. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ryder said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "A baby, our baby." He placed a hand on her still flat stomach, all washing over him. "Kate, I promise you I am going to be the best father I can be." "I know you will," she said, covering his hand with hers. "You are already wonderful with Margaret. Our child will be lucky to have you." They told Margaret that night over dinner, and the girl's face lit up with excitement. "I am going to be an aunt?" she asked. "Well, more like a sister," Kate corrected gently. "But yes, can I help take care of the baby?" Margaret asked. "I promise I will be very careful." "Of course you can," Ryder said. "We are a family and families help each other." The word family seemed to resonate in the room, taking on weight and meaning. They were a family now, bound not just by blood but by choice and love. It was a gift Ryder had not known he needed until he had it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Kate bloomed with it, her face taking on a glow that Ryder found mesmerizing. He found himself constantly wanting to touch her, to feel the growing swell of her belly, to marvel at the life they had created together. He built the new bedroom as promised, working late into the evenings to have it finished before the baby came. Kate sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flying as she prepared for their child's arrival. In late February, on a night when the wind howled around the house and promised another snowstorm, Kate woke Ryder with a hand on his shoulder and said, "It is time." The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ryder feared he would lose her. The midwife he had brought from town worked through the night, and Kate bore the pain with a courage that humbled him. He held her hand, whispered encouragement, and prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in that she would be all right. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, and when the midwife placed him in Kate's arms, Ryder felt tears stream down his face without shame. "We have a son," Kate said wonderingly, her voice exhausted but full of joy. "Ryder, look at him." "He is perfect," Ryder said, running a gentle finger over the baby's downy head, "just like his mother." They named him Robert after Ryder's father, and he quickly became the center of their world. Margaret doted on him, helping Kate with diaper changes and bath time, singing to him when he fussed. Ryder discovered that he loved being a father, loved holding his son and showing him the ranch, even though Robert was far too young to understand anything beyond the warmth and comfort of his parents' arms. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before but richer for it. The ranch continued to prosper, and Ryder hired 2 hands to help with the work, freeing up more time for him to spend with his family. Kate became known in Deeming for her skill with healing herbs, and folks started coming to the ranch seeking remedies for various ailments. She charged little but accepted trades of food and goods, and their pantry and barn were always well stocked as a result. When Robert was 2 years old, Kate became pregnant again, and this time it was a daughter they named Rachel. She had Kate's dark hair and Ryder's blue eyes, and she was as fierce and stubborn as her mother. Watching Kate with their children, seeing the way she loved them and nurtured them, Ryder fell in love with her all over again every single day. Margaret grew into a lovely young woman, smart and kind, and when she was 17, she married a young rancher from outside of town. Ryder walked her down the aisle, and when he placed her hand in her husband's, he felt the weight of responsibility and love in equal measure. She had been his sister in every way that mattered, and he was proud of the woman she had become. The years passed in the way they do when life is full and good. There were hard times, certainly. Droughts that tested their resilience, illnesses that frightened them, losses that left scars. But through it all, Ryder and Kate faced everything together, their love deepening with every challenge overcome. On a warm evening in late spring, 20 years after that day when Ryder had found Kate and Margaret begging in the snow, he sat on the porch with his wife and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. Margaret had 3 children now, and she visited often, her husband having bought land adjacent to Ryder's and the 2 families working together. Robert was 18 and running the ranch with a competence that made Ryder's chest swell with pride. Rachel, at 16, was preparing to become a teacher, her sharp mind and kind heart making her perfect for the job. "Do you remember that day?" Kate asked, her hand in Ryder's. "When you found us in Deeming?" "Every detail," Ryder said. "You looked at me like you could not decide whether to hope or to give up hoping entirely. Margaret was so small, so fragile. I remember thinking I had to help, that I could not live with myself if I did not. You promised us we would never be cold or hungry again," Kate said softly. "It was the most audacious thing anyone had ever said to me. I did not believe you at first, you know. I thought you were either lying or mad." Ryder laughed. "Maybe I was a little mad, but it was the best decision I ever made." "It was the best thing that ever happened to me," Kate said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You saved our lives that day, Ryder, not just physically, but in every way that matters. You gave us a home, a family, a purpose. You loved me when I did not think I deserved to be loved, and you showed Margaret what a good man looks like." "You saved me too," Ryder replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was slowly dying out here, alone and bitter, and convinced that hard work was all life had to offer. You reminded me how to laugh, how to dream, how to love. Everything good in my life came from the moment I decided to stop and help 2 strangers in the snow." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and watched their family thrive. The ranch that had once been Ryder's burden was now a legacy he would pass on to his children, a place built on love and hard work and the courage to take a chance on hope. Kate shifted beside him, and he looked down to see her smiling. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," she said. "About how a moment of desperation led to a lifetime of happiness. About how I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow." "I love you too," Ryder said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "Always have, always will." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast New Mexico sky, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. Inside, they could hear Rachel practicing her piano, the melody drifting through the open windows. In the barn, Robert was likely checking on a mare set to foal soon, taking his responsibilities as seriously as his father always had. And somewhere out there in the growing dark, Margaret was probably tucking her own children into bed, passing on the love and security she had found in this place. It had all started with a promise made to strangers in a snowstorm, a vow that seemed impossible at the time. But Ryder had kept that promise, and in doing so, had built something more valuable than all the gold in California. He had built a family, a home, and a love that would endure long after he was gone. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain, and Kate shivered slightly. Ryder pulled her closer, sharing his warmth, protecting her from the cold just as he had promised to do all those years ago. Some promises, he reflected, were worth keeping forever. And some, like the one he had made to Kate, turned out to be the foundation upon which an entire life could be built. Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Kate's head on his chest and their hands intertwined, Ryder thought about everything they had been through. The desperate beginning, the tentative courtship, the building of trust and love. He thought about their children, strong and happy and ready to face their own futures. He thought about the ranch, thriving and prosperous, a testament to what dedication and family could accomplish. "Ryder," Kate murmured sleepily. "Are you awake?" "Yes," he replied softly. "I never thanked you properly," she said. "For seeing us that day, for stopping, for caring. I never thanked you for keeping your promise." "You thank me every day," Ryder said, kissing her forehead. "Every morning when I wake up next to you, every time I hear you laugh, every time I see our children. That is all the thanks I need." She sighed contentedly and snuggled closer. "Still, thank you for everything." "Thank you," Ryder replied. "For saying yes, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." Within minutes, Kate's breathing had evened out into sleep, but Ryder stayed awake a while longer, his hand gently stroking her hair. He thought about the young man he had been, riding into Deeming that snowy day with no idea his life was about to change forever. If someone had told him then what would come from that simple act of kindness, he would not have believed them. But life had a way of surprising you, of taking your plans and rewriting them into something better than you could have imagined. The ranch would continue long after he was gone, he knew. Robert would run it, and his children after him, and the land would remain in the family for generations. But more than the land, more than the cattle or the buildings or the wealth they had accumulated, Ryder's true legacy would be the love he had shared with Kate, the family they had built together. That was what would endure, what would matter. He finally drifted off to sleep with Kate warm beside him, and his dreams were peaceful. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that made you forget winter had ever existed. Ryder woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and when he wandered into the kitchen, he found Kate already up and cooking, her hair still loose down her back in the way he loved. "Good morning," she said, turning to smile at him. Even after all these years, that smile still made his heart skip a beat. "Good morning," he replied, crossing to her and wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back into him, and they stood like that for a moment, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. "Robert is already out checking fences," Kate said, "and Rachel left early to go into town. She is helping Mrs. Chen prepare for the school board meeting tonight." "That girl is going to change the world someday," Ryder said proudly. "She learned from the best," Kate replied, turning in his arms to face him. "You have been such a good father, Ryder, such a good husband. I hope you know how much you are loved." "I do," he said, cupping her face in his hands, "because you remind me every single day." They had breakfast together on the porch, watching the ranch come to life around them. The hands were heading out to move the cattle to new grazing, and the chickens were clucking contentedly in their coop. Everything was as it should be, peaceful and productive and full of promise. As they sat there, sipping their coffee and enjoying the warmth of the morning sun, a rider appeared on the horizon. Ryder shaded his eyes, trying to make out who it was, and then smiled as he recognized Margaret's youngest son, 10-year-old Thomas. The boy rode up to the house at a gallop, his face flushed with excitement. "Grandpa, Grandma," he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "Mama said to tell you the baby is coming." Kate was on her feet instantly, her face alight with joy. "Margaret is in labor." "Yes, madam," Thomas confirmed. "She said to tell you it is early yet, but she wants you there." "Go saddle the horses," Ryder told Kate, already moving toward the barn. "I will get the supplies together." Within 20 minutes, they were riding toward Margaret's ranch, the journey familiar and the anticipation high. This would be Margaret's fourth child, and though she had managed the previous births with relative ease, Kate always insisted on being present. It was what family did, she said. They showed up for each other, no matter what. The birth went smoothly, and by late afternoon, Margaret's husband announced that they had another daughter. When Ryder and Kate were allowed into the bedroom to meet their newest grandchild, Margaret looked tired but radiant. "We are naming her Katherine," she said, looking at Kate with eyes full of love and gratitude. "After the strongest woman I know." Kate burst into tears, and even Ryder found himself getting choked up. To be honored this way, to have their family grow and thrive, it was more than he had ever hoped for. They stayed for dinner, a rowdy affair with Margaret's other children clamoring for attention, and the new baby being passed around carefully. As Ryder watched his family gathered around the table, laughing and talking and being together, he felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what it was all about. This was what made all the hard work and sacrifice worthwhile. On the ride home, with the stars beginning to emerge overhead, Kate said, "We are blessed, you know, more blessed than most people ever get to be." "I know," Ryder agreed. "Sometimes I cannot quite believe this is my life, that I got so lucky." "It was not luck," Kate said firmly. "It was choice. You chose to help us that day in the snow. You chose to open your home and your heart. You chose love over loneliness, family over solitude. That was not luck, Ryder. That was you being the man you are." "Maybe," Ryder conceded, "but you chose me too. You could have left in the spring like you planned. You could have built a life somewhere else. But you stayed, and you loved me, and you made this possible." He gestured around them, encompassing the land and the sky and everything they had built together. "None of this happens without you." They rode in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in that way only long married couples can be. When they reached their ranch and put the horses away, they stood together in the barn, holding hands and listening to the soft sounds of the animals settling for the night. "Ryder," Kate said suddenly, "do you ever regret it? Taking us in, I mean. We turned your whole life upside down." "Not for a single second," Ryder said without hesitation. "You and Margaret gave my life meaning. Everything before you was just preparation, just waiting. My real life started the day I saw you in the snow and decided to do something about it." Kate smiled, that beautiful smile that still made him weak in the knees after all these years. "You promised we would never be cold or hungry again, and you kept that promise, Ryder Galloway. You kept it every single day." "I will keep it until the day I die," Ryder vowed. "And even then, I will have left you and our children with everything you need to keep going. You will always be taken care of, Kate, always." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and whispered against his lips, "I love you." "I love you too," he replied. "More than words can say." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their way lit by starlight and the lamp Rachel had left burning in the window. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with the evidence of their life together. Photographs on the walls, children's drawings tacked up in the kitchen, books scattered on the tables. It was not a fancy house or a grand one, but it was a home in every sense of the word. As they prepared for bed, moving around each other with the ease of long practice, Ryder reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate day in the snow to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been a path filled with challenges and joys in equal measure. But he would not trade a single moment of it, not even the hard parts, because all of it had led to this. To Kate, to their children, to the family they had built from nothing but determination and love. That night, as he held his wife close and listened to the wind whisper around the eaves, Ryder Galloway felt like the richest man in the world. Not because of the land he owned or the cattle he ran or the money in his account, but because he had love. Real, lasting, transformative love. The kind of love that changed everything, that made even the coldest winter warm and the hardest work worthwhile. He had promised Kate and Margaret they would never be cold or hungry again, and he had kept that promise. But the truth was, They had given him far more than he had given them. They had given him a reason to build instead of just survive, a family to love instead of just loneliness to endure, a future to look forward to instead of just a past to mourn. As sleep finally claimed him, Ryder's last conscious thought was one of gratitude. Gratitude for the storm that had brought them together, for the courage to make a promise, for the strength to keep it. Gratitude for every day with Kate, for every moment with his children, for every year of the beautiful life they had built together. And somewhere in the darkness, warm and safe and loved, Kate smiled in her sleep, dreaming of snow and promises and the cowboy who had kept them all.